experience and use of Turnitin via the final year project in the School of System Engineering. I'm talking about the 4th and 3rd year project module, and historically we had issue with plagiarism cases, and as far as the staff is concerned, some of you might know, it's very time consuming. So, and personally, before I was sort of reluctant to use Turnitin because of it was taking a lot of my time, but as soon as Blackboard allowed the use of the Turnitin assessment system, I jumped onto it and started using it. And I set up a particular procedure in relation to projects so that the student can effectively engage and practice with Turnitin, so that when comes the stage of their final report write-up, they can take charge and the responsibility for their own write-up. Looking at the Originality Report, you see the paper, highlighted in that paper the text similar the system has found. Together with on the right-hand side, you see the link to the source document. So the student can look at those links and realize what effectively Turnitin does. So they can practice with that and hopefully improve their academic writing. So hopefully when comes the time of the final report, well, it can be very tough. They have to take charge and responsibility for what they're doing, which means they're only allowed one submission. That's it, full stop. Which means they still have access to their Originality Report, but that one is final, so they can no longer tweak the report or change the option or play with the system. That's it, it's done. No more plagiarism case on projects, and obviously we've had saved a lot of time.
I work at the Institute of Education, and the caveat there for us is, as professional teachers, which is how we view our students from day one, plagiarism is a big no-no. So I personally take Turnitin from the first assignment that they submit right the way through to the end. My motto with them is to try to think like the students, because in order to sell it to them, I've got to try to explain that we're not just hitting them with a big stick. There is a pedagogical reason for using Turnitin, namely that they're going to think about their own work. Another thing they really take to heart is not the squeaky clean assignment that you show them that comes up with no hint of plagiarism. They want to see a bad one. They want to see what it looks like if they get caught out, but they don't want the experience of being the one that gets caught out. And then they take the moral high ground. One of the other things I do with my students is get them to mark another student's essay. Obviously not a student that's in the room with them, but one from a previous year with a name blacked out, and they are so hard. They are nasty markers when it's another student. So I like to show them what they can see on a nastily hacked up one. Okay, so this is one. It's an essay on C.S. Lewis, Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. And you can see where most of my academic sources have been cited. The venerable Wikipedia has come up with some ideas. Spark Notes, that's a good favourite. And there's always somebody who's got something to say about Walt Disney. I try to give them the opportunity to think like we're thinking, so they will not be shocked and horrified when they don't get the grades or when they're not operating as they should do. There's been a large pickup by the final year students asking for supplementary access to Turnitin. In the final year they do subject specialism dissertation, probably facilities. That was a very, very large piece of work. And historically they haven't had access to Turnitin for that. But because I've caught my first years all the way through to the 3rd year, they asked for a separate page just for their own self-testing, so they do love this. And they used it to monitor their own dissertations. And it was a self-request, which I thought spoke volumes, actually.
We're a fairly new school in our current form, so the office procedures in the constituent departments of the school are all slightly different. So we had to decide where we needed to coordinate in the use of Turnitin and where we could leave individual departments to continue with what they had been doing. it seemed that the easiest way to do this was to produce a handout for students and also for staff. And the first one is for members of staff on setting up the Turnitin assignment. We just needed to make sure that staff were briefed on the steps they needed to take, and also in a couple of places where there were things that we definitely needed to have coordinated. So we agreed that there would be a paper assignment, one assignment with the where students could overwrite, they could resubmit drafts. Under the optional settings, we agreed that the sort of detailed instructions would be left to individual departments, what you put about where you hand the essay in and what the exact deadline for paper copies versus electronic copies, that would be left to the individual departments because the offices had different systems running. So partly practical, but also because this does allow for formative, for thinking about the way that they're using their referencing. Also, because in our school students are given a certain amount of time for the assignments, the essay questions are released at a certain date, so they only have so much time to do it. The chances of them being able to play with the system, to rewrite and rewrite in order to turn it in, seemed a little bit less. Our experience was that they submitted one draft, and when that was okay, then they submitted the final. We also produced a handout for students, which explains to them about the Turnitin, the link within Blackboard, where they'll find it, what it should look like when they put their essay up, and a prose description of the limits and value of the Originality Report, that it's not proof, but it is evidence, and that the report will be looked at by tutors to check. We explained to the students what the Originality Report is for and what its limitations are. And lastly, we produced a document for staff explaining to them about how to get at the Originality Report, which is a bit counterintuitive, I think, but where you can find it. But we also used this as an opportunity to alert staff to some of the university's guidelines on the use of these. For example, if the students submit by name or with their university login, the system may recognise them and the Originality Report will turn up with their names. If we have anonymous submission of essay work, so we need to keep the marking of the paper copy a little bit separate from the checking of the Originality Report to preserve that anonymity. So we flagged that up at the beginning. We also again explain about the limitations of the traffic light system, and this is kind of good practice about not simply relying on the traffic lights, but waiting until you get your eye in to how it will turn out in your discipline or even in particular modules. We copy out what you will see, the detail of what the students are told, and also a couple of other notes that markers need to be aware of, the way the Turnitin will go to the most immediate, the top level source, but not drill down, and maybe members of staff will need to drill down. That it doesn't pick up everything. For example, Google may pick up things that it doesn't. And so if you suspect a case of plagiarism and Turnitin doesn't seem to corroborate that, the professional judgment by the academic marker is still to be respected, and the marker should continue in the way that they normally would, not to just assume that the computer says yes or the computer says no. And also, if you find a case of plagiarism, that you can download or copy, but bearing in mind the university's regulations not to proliferate copies of students' work unnecessarily. So this training document allows us to explain the technicalities of getting to the Originality Report and reading it, but it also allows us distribute information about good practice in using Turnitin and alert staff to the university regulations with respect to electronic submission. The schools will kind of use them, but also adapt them to the different office arrangements in place across the school.